All the spots as a pre-flop raiser are divided into four groups, which I pointed out for myself. They differ a lot from each other in terms of the strategy used. The first spot is when we are in early position, middle position, or cut off and got a cold call from a player in position. So let's work. The first part of the game as a pre-flop raiser is early position, middle position, cutoff against a call from a player in position. The second spot is the same position against the blinds. These spots are fundamentally different in terms of absence and presence of position. In this case, blinds usually have significantly wider ranges than cold callers do in position. The third spot, I would say that this is the most cash spot in terms of potential increase in win rate. If we do our best to improve the game in this spot, then our win rate can increase significantly. It is a button against the blinds. I would say that this is the spot in which the main money is made in the more than 6 max. And button against the blinds in 3-bet pots. It's very important. I'll even stress it with exclamation marks. Those players who will adjust their game on the blinds will go far ahead of the main field. Well, the fourth spot is small blind versus big blind. It's fundamentally different from the first spot because simply because the ranges here are 2 to 3 times wider, and there's another equity ratio between the ranges, another ratio between nuts, and so on. The frequency of continuation bet depends on the ratio of equity ranges. The lower our equity, the lower the continuation bet. The second point is the number of nuts in our range. Here is a hand from the button, half pot on the flop, overbet. Here I used a little smaller sizing. Yes, it is a strange situation here. 5x, a bet of third of the pot. The fact is that with aces we may get no value overbet on such a river, so I made a bet of a smaller size. I will make an overbet here with hands from ace-3 and overbet push them. And for a thinner value bet I use a third of the pot. We will get a call from king 10 with a blocker on the flush draw. This is what we wanted here. So there is such a size on the river because with aces I will not have a value bet on such a river on a 5 because opponents call on the turn with 5-3, 5-6, various ace-5 hands. Good opponents, and at NL1000 all opponents are good, and I can't play raise on the turn. They will have ace-3, 6-3, deuces, 4s, 5s, king 5, so an overbet with aces here can be an overplay. Here I will basically split the sizings into one small and one overbetting. My overbet will include hands ace-3 plus. I will bet a third of the pot. The opponent on such a river with his blocker most likely needs to fold his king 10 with a 10 in the suit, since he will have here perhaps 70% of the range of king x. But against overbets, I call as much as necessary. On the turn, he needs to defend around 35% of his range. A fold to the second barrel will be 65%, but this is normal for such a spot. I made a bet on the river and the opponent called. I'd like to stress that the training about the blinds will be made separately at another lesson. Therefore, now we will focus on the game as a cold caller in position. And we will glance over the blinds as well. The only thing that should be mentioned is that I'm playing rather rarely with a cold call in position currently, and this game is more exploiting. I will describe all these aspects. So let's create a text file. For the start, I'd like to describe a short fundamental theory of the cold call to show you why we are doing it and when you should choose fold or 3-bet. If we consider a spot when we are on so-called free positions with no blinds up to the button, these are early position, middle position, cutoff, and the button. In these positions, if hands have expectation of less than 0, we fold them. Then there are several possible variants because we can play both with 3-bet or call. What should we prefer? There are certain borderline figures of estimated value. Let's call it a conditional x. When estimated value exceeds 0 but is less than x, where x is estimated value, which is a borderline value between 3-bet and call, I'll explain this moment. If estimated value is more than x, then we play with 3-bet. It means that if some hand plays with a 3-bet better than with the call, then we should send it to a 3-bet range. If 3-bet estimated value is smaller than estimated value of the call, but it still exceeds 0, then we send this hand to a cold call. The matter is that usually this value of x is about 50 big blinds per 100 or something like that. In real life, there are few hands that play with cold call to a good plus, and at the same time do not play with the 3-bet to even a better plus. Therefore, I'm using a 3-bet strategy in the majority of situations in position, just because it brings more estimated value. I will write an example. Let's say we have a Queen-Jack suited on the button. Usually a cold call will have expectation of about 50 to 100 big blinds per 100 hands. Meanwhile, using a 3-bet, we play this hand at 150 big blinds per 100. Taking into account this situation, we should tend to 3-bet our hands more. But there is a certain border lying usually among hands of connector types. This is 9-8, 8-7, some offsuit broadways, the 3-bet estimated value of which becomes less than that of a cold call. But alongside with it, a call is essentially better than 0. In this case, we have a cold call range consisting basically of these borderline hands which are not played with a 3-bet to a greater plus. And here we have a natural question. Can we precisely divide everything that is better than x to 3-bet and from 0 to x to cold call? Won't our cold call range be exploited? As a result, it can become very narrow, so there will be quite a small set of hands. In fact, this lack of balance does not really matter in reality, since our opponents cannot exploit it. And not because they cannot play, but because they need to know for sure that we don't have some kind of hands in cold call. And they cannot know that we 3-bet King Jack, King Queen, and Queen Jack, for example. Even if all these things can be tracked using notecaddy or various hand-to-notes, the opponent has yet to understand it and adjust his exploit of this thing. And I would say, as a rule, this exploit will be quite uncommon. Use of large sizes, big check raises, pressure on the capped range. These things almost do not occur at mid-stakes at all. I will write it down. Ace-10 are almost the same as King-10, especially against early position. Here, against the same fish, against early position, I enter with ace-10 offsuit. The thing here is that the opponent uses small sizing. If he opened the three big blinds, I'd probably choose not to play. Or I'd probably enter if the fish had the stack of my size. The regular has it. And it is possible to enter here under a min raise, having 100 big blind stacks. What concerns the game with pocket fours, yes, I'd probably use big sizing here, but not quite probably that a 2x overbet, as I still cap on the flop by my check behind there. The opponent can have flushes with his range within his range of two checks. With that in mind, I would use big sizing, but not a 2x overbet. Perhaps about 1.2, 1.4 overbet, but not more. We also have to take into account what hands form the biggest part of our range. If we want to make value bets with some ace queen or ace king, which is in fact a thin value bet in that spot, then we should tend to apply small sizing. We should analyze whether our range is wide enough to have two sizings, like a half of the pot and an overbet. Otherwise, we simply take one, like 70–80% of the pot. I'd probably sit and think how my range may look like and then would bet with it. I think I would bet with 80% of the pot. Actually, there is such a hand on the post flop here that we can both bet and check. I will usually mix my strategy. Sometimes I will make a bet, like here, I made a bet. A regular player will often simply surrender. And I check through to the river, because we have some showdown value here. Of course it is small, but this fish proved to be rather passive. I mean, he did not bluff enough with drawing hands. He could have 9–10, queen high, hearts, and so on. Therefore, I would not bluff with ace-10. I'd rather bluff with 9–10. Here is a cold call under a fish on big blind, but it is non-standard, as I always have this hand in 3-bet range against middle position. But since the fish sits on blinds, we enter the pot. It's not a very good moment for a cold call here because Stefan sits upstras and squeezes 10%. But fortunately, he squeezes much less than 3 bets. If Sible opens 3 big blinds, I'd also 3-bet here instead of cold calling because in this case I will lose more when we are squeezed. But here I entered with a call to almost a min raise. Well, we definitely call on the flop when he bets third of the pot. On the turn, when he checks, we get a chance to bet here, as our range is quite. I want to often make thin value bets here. I have almost no bluffs, some 9 jack, 8, 9. Therefore, I use very small sizing here. The situation is quite opposite on the blank river. I will make polarized bets here. As a rule, I'll have fewer bluffs, fewer value bets here. And the minimal hand I will bet here with is ace-queen. Therefore, I use big sizing. The opponent opened us up having ace-king.